I'm gonna be honest with you up front. I had a craving for some lowbrow, mainstream, AAA stuff for this review. I wanted something shiny, but also something easy to approach. I wanted not a masterpiece. It's been a really long time since I've played a good Star Wars game. My mid-90s childhood is lined with the games of LucasArts' golden age, so I wanted to play one of those. The punishingly boring Watch Dogs, which served as the subject of my very first Nth review a decade ago, is the last time I played and completed an open world game from Ubisoft, so I wanted to play a fun one of those. Star Wars Outlaws is all of those things, and it's out now. But before I could even take the plastic off this game's digital wrapper, the reaction to this big new Jedi-free open-world action game starring the iconic American science fiction franchise was mixed. Some would see this as a turnoff, but I saw it as an invitation, a puzzle to figure out. That Outlaws exists in a post-George Lucas Star Wars-averse at all is actually an interesting development on its own. Disney had built and then almost completely shuttered its internal game development unit by the time it purchased Lucasfilm in 2012 for over $4 billion, so it sadly made sense that they would close Lucasfilm's internal game studio, the long-celebrated LucasArts, a year later. Since there was obviously money to be made, but they didn't want to bankroll the risk themselves, Disney cracked a deal with Electronic Arts, of all publishers, to become the exclusive developer of Star Wars titles going forward. The results were mixed. EA is known for some gems, but the publisher, which is often ranked as America's worst company, is known for its commodified, low-ambition games with licensed or otherwise mainstream appeal. While I'm sure those factors were considered when Disney crowned EA with the Star Wars license, I'm also sure the financial terms of the deal overwrote any sanity checks. As bigger, more nefarious publishers like EA trended towards integrating pay-to-win randomized loot boxes into their gameplay progression schemes a decade ago, they became an industry boondoggle. Star Wars as a brand came under fire with EA's multiplayer shooter Battlefront 2. Website Star Wars Gaming once tabulated that beyond the upfront price of the game, it would cost you $2,100 or take over 4,500 hours to unlock all of the content included in the game. That Battlefront 2 was incredibly popular despite EA's malicious schemes only amplified the scrutiny of the game, the brand, the publisher, and the loot box mechanic entirely. Loot boxes were such a brazenly naked approach to fleece gamers of their money, especially young gamers, that legislators from around the world began looking into the practice as a form of unregulated gambling. Publishers like EA and Activision defended the practice at first, but as governments began to take action, they began to back down. Despite all this, Ubisoft got an in and announced in February 2021 that they would be building an open-world game with the property, which became Star Wars Outlaws. But in this COVID era, an open-world Ubisoft Star Wars game carries its own set of baggage. Star Wars' once most treasured property, rarity, has been dashed by Disney across a string of annual theatrical releases and a seemingly endless stream of Disney Plus content. Ubisoft nearly perfected its third-person open-world action game over a decade ago with Assassin's Creed 2 and Far Cry 3. There's probably a few other games in there too, but who cares? This isn't science. Ubisoft then spread those lessons across nearly all of their franchises. This kicked off a seemingly endless parade of Assassin's Creed and Far Cry sequels, plus its Tom Clancy Ghost Recon and Division games, and the previously mentioned Watch Dogs. Ubisoft had perfected and duplicated this formula with such fidelity that gamers naturally began to feel fatigued, especially when it was being used to craft lengthy 100-hour adventures. If you've been playing any one of these series long enough, you can probably imagine what Star Wars Outlaws plays like in your sleep before the game even materializes in your video game device of choice. As a reviewer who's fortunately been able to slip by most of Star Wars' latter-day content and haven't become fatigued with Ubisoft's modern open-worlders yet, I felt like I was in a unique position to dig into Star Wars Outlaws to see what's really inspiring its mixed reception. And yes, I know that there are lots of mechanics in this game that were introduced in other Ubisoft games over the years. I know you know what they are, but ignorance has been truly bliss in this case. During the production of this video, Ubisoft is patching and tweaking core gameplay mechanics in a kind of emergency cadence. While I might comment on some of these tweaks as I'm going back for footage, this review reflects the state of the game at launch and as I completed it, so you are free to compare and contrast as you see fit. I'm not entirely sure these tweaks will alter too much of my overarching thoughts on the game now or going forward. I'm also setting aside the growing number of comments from within Ubisoft highlighting how out of touch they are with the common gamer or their greater corporate issues, because it's becoming a bit much, and it's honestly not terribly relevant to the vast majority of this review anyway. So is this open world pew pew zoom zoom game any fun? Does it deserve the critical and commercial side eye it's gotten, especially after Bethesda's Starfield received a similar drubbing last year? Are high budget space based open world games all destined for failure? Let's strap into our rare Carillion freighter and find out. It may not be the first, but it is the nth review, number 25, for Star Wars Outlaws, brought to you by my patrons at patreon.com/the nth review.
Hey, got a tip for you. Jinjo's hiding out in Janta's Hope. He's planning to join the Huts.
Who's Jinjo?
Guards the gambling halls. Complains a lot.
Oh, that Jinjo. He's still around?
The story of Star Wars Outlaws is really the story of Kay Vess, a young thief and a scoundrel who's clearly not very good at this whole stealing stuff and making money thing. From the game's opening moments, Kay finds herself in a lot of trouble without a lot of leverage in any of her moment-to-moment negotiations.
You've got no crew, Kay, and you keep going it alone with high-risk scores that just go sideways.
She lives in an attic above a bar on the casino planet Canto Bight, taking place decades before the events of The Last Jedi, the 2017 film it debuted in. She's so down on her luck that her lockpicking tool was found broken and being sold in the streets after one of her most recently botched jobs. As the gameplay starts, repairing it becomes your first task, requiring you to learn how to scrounge and steal money from others in the markets around the bar to afford it. A big set of the game's mechanics are based on Kay growing into her role as she finds mentors across the galaxy, acquiring items and closing out task lists to build her skills based on what they teach. While she learns a lot about the universe's movers and shakers on this adventure, it seems a little strange that she isn't knowledgeable about some of them already when all the syndicates you encounter are multiplanetary and their bosses are relatively famous. Well, infamous, I guess. In fact, it's not very clear what Kay knows going into this game and how experienced she really is. It actually made me wonder if she had ever gone off planet before the events of this game, because she has no gleeful excitement of entering space with the Trailblazer like Parvati does when you leave Terra 2 in the Outer Worlds, but she also doesn't seem to have any anecdotes about other planets either. It seems like a missed opportunity to make her more relatable and realistic either way. Kay is Solo-era Han Solo. Yes, I've seen that film, at least. Which sets up her character arc by framing her rookie vulnerability, her naivete, and her easy ability to be deceived. She can even get a vest in his iconic Kessel style in an early tongue-in-cheek drop. Through a series of flashbacks, we discover that her mother and mentor, Rico, is long gone, and despite her best efforts, Kay was never very good at this. As the game progresses, you realize that while she's trying to prove a lot to herself and others, Kay actually possesses a lot of unsharpened natural talent. She struggles, but she's confident enough to persevere and bluff her way to success. Her bartender landlord and longtime friend, Bram, keeps her housed and secure so she can continue to grow in this hostile environment. While Kay reflects on her upbringing on Canto Bight and fleeting references here and there, especially those surrounding an old friend she has to liberate from an Imperial facility, it would have been a lot of fun if the game fleshed out her time there more. Canto Bight is such an interesting setting, but the game spends precious little time here before you're off jumping across the galaxy. But Kay isn't alone on her journey. Nyx is her longtime companion and friend. The game's lore calls them a Mercal, but you can see them on the cover just as well as I can. They're an alien axolotl thing. Nyx is small, super cute, and always perky and bright with a slurpy smile. They're a bit of a Disney character, but I also know that the small, cute sidekick has been a trope in Star Wars since, forever. Of course, it doesn't help that they can be dressed in all kinds of cute dresses, or these cute goggles. Oh my goodness. Gameplay-wise, Nick serves as an extension of Kay. An icon with his outlined head will appear over other people and so many items in the environment, including ones you're so close to that Kay could just complete the task herself with a different button press. But if you want to stay hidden and accomplish something somewhere else with an eye shot, Nyx lets you do just that. They can do all kinds of stuff, like press buttons, blow up stuff, or distract guards by pretending to keel over and die in front of them. It's so cute! They'll even leap on your back when ascending or descending ladders. The game even has a special Nyx vision, which they actually call Nyx Sense, but that doesn't sound very cool, where you can scan the environment for things they can manipulate or steal when you're truly lost, which you will be. It's inevitable. Some of the game's puzzles rely on you having line of sight with a target or using your Nyx vision to highlight traces from one thing to another thing so you can send Nyx to do whatever. Thankfully, Nyx doesn't set off alarms as you send them to perform long-distance tasks. You can pet Nyx too. You can pet lots of animals in this universe, thankfully. Sometimes you just need a game that lets you pet space critters. You know what I mean? Okay, so what's actually going on in this universe? Well, after the destruction of the first Death Star, the syndicates of the Star Wars underworld are vying for the limelight, while the Rebel Alliance and the Galactic Empire square off across the galaxy. Outlaws opens as a big, bad, evil British dude, and Zarek Besh leader Sliro invites representatives of the game's other criminal syndicates to a dinner. His brother left him scraps at the family dinner table as a kid, he says. He's starving, he says. He then promptly murders them all to send home the message that he's a big, bad, evil British dude and that the Zarek Besh mean business. Unfortunately for you, the player, or Kay the character, why this is important won't become apparent for quite a while to come. Several layers down on Canto Bight, the odds are so stacked against Kay that even as she technically succeeds in her first job, infiltrating Club Tarsus for an identicard, a neighborhood gang smashes up Bram's bar looking for her. After taking a blaster shot to the leg, Bram finally kicks her out of the house, forcing her into the real world to figure out how to survive on her own. But he doesn't send her off completely empty-handed. He hands her a job with a crew led by a woman named Denyon. Their speeder awaits nearby. Denyon's job has you breaking into Sliro's mansion and its well-hidden and well-secured vault for a big prize. Despite your up-and-coming status, you somehow manage to pull this off single-handedly before realizing that there's no great fortune in there at all. When your crew shows up, they speak cryptically about why not. Confused and frustrated, Kay asks for her slice of the payout, and they reveal that they're actually part of the Rebel Alliance, and the great fortune was the friends he made along the way. Kay disagrees with this, and they stun her, leaving her for dead, I guess. Again, this will all make sense far later in the game, but not yet. Not even close to yet. Kay narrowly escapes Sliro's grasp, and for her trouble, she's given a death mark that makes her a wanted woman across the galaxy. This is supposed to be some big deal that makes it difficult for her to move around or make friends or whatever, but it doesn't. In the ensuing chaos at Sliro's hillside retreat, you end up stealing one of his prized ships and escaping to the moon of Tashara, where you'll spend the next big chunk of the game. Kay doesn't land on Tashara very softly, so you spend a lot of time there rebuilding her stolen ship so she can figure out next steps. Kay gets acquainted with the first 3 of the game's 4 criminal syndicates, pissing off one in favor of another, task by task. After initially attempting to kill her, a Rhodian mechanic quickly volunteers to help Kay out by converting the ship's list of needs into a convenient series of quests. If his offering to do a ton of free work for Kay to fix your ship seems fishy, well, Sliro, who's barely had a presence in the game so far, disappears for a long while, only popping up in cutscenes between worlds to furrow his brow and admonish his incompetent subordinates. Sliro's back-of-the-bus presence in this game is just one of the story's many misses. It may have been a decade since I've completed a Ubisoft open-worlder, but I've actually started a few since then, like Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, Assassin's Creed Unity, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and Far Cry 6. Starting out, Star Wars Outlaws isn't much different than any of those. The first few hours of this game, especially its first 2, are its roughest because of how firmly it guides you when the game is ultimately about having a lot of freedom to do stuff. It feels perfectly calculated to not lead you off track while cramming as much story as possible before you faff off about in the countryside of whatever vast region they've designed to have you faff about in. Ubisoft's treatment of the player and the story itself up front feels like they gave it an abnormal growth hormone with how quickly and somewhat unnaturally it pushes you off planet. Within 120 minutes of starting this game, you go from pickpocketing change off of passers-by in your neighborhood so you can repair a vital tool, to bluffing your way through an encounter with a syndicate underboss on another world. It is so much information in such a short time that it only really made sense when watching my footage after beating the game. It also found ways to make the opposite of sense too. Without giving away too much off the bat, the story and its characters are also really cryptic and foreshadowy because it's trying to set up things in the back half of the story that you, the player, won't encounter for dozens of hours still. I'll be going back through this later with context. But this isn't just a narrative funnel, it's a gameplay one too. The game's rigorous and lengthy tutorial holds back on so many key components of the game's eventual gameplay loop for so long that you might think that it's a much simpler game than its contemporaries too. Outlaws does eventually let more mechanics creep in, especially through its myriad of upgrade screens, but it's a long, gradual climb. Even after the game begins to pull back the curtain on its gears and cogs, the moment-to-moment action generally feels simpler than similar games, even from Ubisoft, to the extent that I wondered if there were some mechanics I was missing. That said, there are also lots of quality of life features that make life easier, like the helpful fields in this game's many vendor screens that inform you if an item or material is necessary for upgrades or crafting, or if something you've pilfered is safe to sell without breaking a quest. There are even diegetic arrows in the environment that are either helpful or aesthetically distracting, that point you toward where you should go and where you should leap, or whatever. And this stands alongside the fact that you'll have plenty of opportunities to grow and use those skills. As you orient yourself to Tashara, the gravelly voiced Moncal broker Danka helps you out with your first jobs, easing you into the initial vastness of work in this game.
Tell your client KVS is in.
Cute. Desperate, but cute.
There are a lot of talent trees to fill, there are a lot of tools to upgrade, and yes, there are plenty of materials to collect to facilitate all of that. If you close your eyes or are just playing this video in the background, all of this sounds like pretty standard Ubisoft stuff. But this is a lot more than your typical Ubisoft open worlder. Oh yes, indeed.
This looks like it's seen better days.
It flies, kinda. You got another job for me?
How do you feel about crossing imps?
Not good. Kate, tell her not good.
For me, the biggest selling point of Outlaws above all else, and something that this game takes a lot of pride in, is in the fact that this game was clearly put together by a team who appreciates and have deeply studied the aesthetic of the saga. It's truly a love letter to the look, sound, and feel of the franchise and its universe. It seals you in like a comfortable blanket, bringing all the warm, fuzzy feelings that the universe produces, for whatever that's worth to you. Heck, in combat, dying enemies throw themselves back and yell out with incredible theatricality, like the movies did. The art direction reflects the timelessness of Star Wars settings, props, and standards, depicting the rickety movement of its AT-ST walkers, to the Orabesh dress signage, to the ancient ship reactors you need to wake up. Taking place during the original trilogy of films, which was created in an era before CGI everything, Outlaws sports a look and feel that understands how the original trilogy looked and functioned. Even the explosions look ripped straight from the movies. There are wipe transitions between scenes and title cards. There's a subtle spherical lens effect throughout the game that emphasizes the notion that this is a 1970s production replicated by the technology of half a century later. You can turn it off if you'd like, but Outlaws extensively uses ITC avant-garde Gothic for its headlines and visual bumpers, which was very loudly introduced with the sequel trilogy. It's hard to imagine it being used as a display font in a big, expensive game like this otherwise. There are a lot of artistic elements that are designed not to copy what had come before, but create something new that's very inspired by the original materials. There are so many locations you'll sneak through and characters you'll chat with that look like they're from deleted scenes from the original trilogy, like this game could happen in that universe. It also, thankfully, eschews anything related to Jedi and the Force, because they're the series' narrative cheat code. I get people like all that, stuff, but it instantly turns anything it touches into fantasy, and I'm kind of tired of it. Properties like Outlaws, Tony Gilroy's Andor, and even LucasArts' own Dark Forces from 1995 have explored the grungy, technology-focused, lightsaber-free part of this property that I enjoy the most, the actual science fiction. Because this is an open-world Star Wars game, you've got a spaceship to travel around the galaxy in, and a speeder bike so you can zoom across the terrain of these worlds like the franchise promises. I'll have plenty to say about those later. The loud, bombastic music swells and Star Warsian stingers when you do something really cool immerse you in the action while serving alongside more modern bass intense synths during action sequences. The club anthems in this game are bops. On top of the series' reliable Foley work and Nyx's fun chirps and slurps, the warble on your speeder as you accelerate or decelerate is incredible. There are lots of interesting alien characters here too, and many still look like people with firm rubber masks from the 70s. A lot fewer of them speak their native language than I expected. Star Wars games used to relegate aliens to using looped sound bites from the movies as you read subtitles, but here they just go for broke by having them speak English. Sorry, basic. There are lots of new characters and locations with weird Star Wars names that I struggled to keep up with, even into the production of this review. Naturally, this is a problem enhanced by the fact that it's an open world game. Modern gaming technology makes this all possible in a way that's never been possible before, but this kind of lavish, heartfelt attention to embracing and extending the look and feel of the original trilogy is only magical if you have a reverence for it. In replicating that magic with such a high fidelity, Massive also copied some of the negative parts of the series too. Outlaws takes place in a very specific time period in the Star Wars canon, literally only a year. But until the game makes a couple of very specific references, it's easy to imagine it taking place in a huge swath of time, unanchored from any of the movies. Even though Star Wars spans thousands of years, technological advancement seems to have peaked before any observable media, so any changes between eras seem more stylistic than anything. Outlaws is the first piece of Star Wars media to my eye that effectively includes content from all three film trilogies. Well, outside of the Lego Star Wars games anyway. I swear I even saw Han Solo's asymmetrical speeder from the Solo flick in here. Being set during the original Star Wars trilogy, this game is supposed to glow up the fight between the Empire and the Rebel Alliance, but that still feels far away from what's going on here. You get to brush alongside that war with some generic battles, featuring characters you've never heard of before, but it feels like a thin way to shoehorn the banner conflict of the original trilogy into Kay's ascendance. I'm not opposed to Outlaws' position in the Star Wars canon, I'm opposed to how thinly it's connected to the original trilogy and what the game ultimately uses that umbilical for, because Ubisoft and Massive couldn't help themselves. There are so many cameos here of characters and locations that it makes the Star Wars universe feel smaller. The Editing Room, a website that writes satirical scripts of movies, released one for Episode 3 around the time that movie came out. There's one section in particular that stuck with me in the 2 decades since because it's remained stubbornly true and fresh in a new era of corporate-directed cinematic universes and multi-format world building. I put it up on the screen, but please read the whole script, it's hilarious. I'm putting the link in the description. And so Outlaws must commit these sins too. Of course you go to the planet Tatooine, the series' most popular planet. Of course you wander around Mos Eisley, its most popular town, where you can visit its cantina, the series' most popular cantina. Of course you meet with Jabba the Hutt in his palace, complete with one of those iStock robots, and you take out one of his Rancors, because that's the thing that happened in the movie, so you get to do that in this game, with all the enthusiasm of a theme park ride too. That it fleshes all these things out more than any other media in the Star Wars franchise universe allows it to kind of sidestep the frustration of mining such popular content and contriving reasons why you're experiencing it. While I know that LucasArts games of the 90s I grew up with would reference the prequel films if they existed, wandering through a Clone Wars era droid factory to aid one of your party members in this game feels tacked on, rather than an organic exploration of the universe. And then there are the tropes of the series implemented here that had me rolling my eyes a bit. There's your super powerful droid companion who doesn't pick up on social cues to hilarious effect. Nyx is the game's cute shoulder-mounted companion because apparently that's a standard in Star Wars games these days. And then there's the execution of the art direction altogether, which is solid. Beyond the game's sturdy adherence to the original property, Outlaws dabbles in neon lighting and its underworld theming. This isn't pristine high-level Star Wars, this is grungy and out of the way a bit. Outlaws is an expensive and elaborately produced game that puts a lot of talent, care, and energy into creating these thoroughly believable worlds. Whether it's the upscale fixtures of Sliro's mansion or the junkyards of Mos Eisley, there's a lot of attention to detail here. These open worlds are stylized and gorgeous. Clusters of grass blow in the wind while drastic rock formations hang on the horizon. There are space butterflies fluttering around and other indigenous critters. Seeing snow accumulate on Kay's hair and clothing on the frigid world of Kijimi is dope AF. Interiors are good, reproducing the earthen colors and naturalistic settings of a Star Wars movie set, or the cold, flat space Nazi aesthetic of the Imperial facilities that you infiltrate. The user interface is clean and very text-oriented, enhanced with subtle neon glows, and lots of cleverly utilized curves and bounding boxes. It's very approachable, even if the structures of its upgrade trees aren't the most intuitive things. The on-screen UI at any time is minimal, which is cool. There's even the somewhat random ability to lean against railings and other fixtures throughout the galaxy, not for any meaningful gameplay function, but to make Kay look cool for the game's obligatory photo mode. The game also has tons of accessibility features for those who need it or want it. Rarely, the presentation doesn't quite hold up, because nothing is ever perfect and this game clearly shipped early. There are frame rate hitches, particularly with the cinematics. There are periodic visual flaws like flashing HDR/skyboxes and long HDR adjustment periods when wandering in and out of spaces. I also encountered weird police-like siren flashes around my character or along the bottom of the screen. In a one-off glitch during a cutscene, full poly 3D models wouldn't load in. Similarly, there's the rare opportunity to see weather blowing deep inside facilities. While the Empire's shiny floors are typically accurate to the light sources above them, sometimes this illusion breaks down into shimmering glitter. There's also tiny, almost unnoticeable UI glitching around the recharging stun shot indicator. The compass/destination indicator is really difficult to see in bright daytime settings, as are the enemy indicators during combat on the ground and in space combat that keep you informed about what they're doing, whether it's a combatant about to trigger an alarm or tossing a grenade at you. This becomes frustrating as fights get larger in more open environments. The lesser characters of the world have faces that approach something closer to The Sims in terms of smoothed out generic models. It's not night and day, they're not quite rubbery masks on top of animated digital robotics, but it is noticeable, especially in cutscenes where the camera cuts between a tier 1 model like Kay and these characters. But even Kay and the other top tier characters can be pretty dead-eyed and unemotive, their faces as stiff as the aliens in a lot of cases. This is a confusing development considering there's proof that their actors performed in mocap suits with facial capture gear. The weirdest creative choice this game makes, and you know this if you've played any of it so far, is kicking things off in the wide 21:9 aspect ratio presented with letterboxing, even on 16:9 displays. It's more cinematic that way, which is fine for films that are composed specifically for that real estate, but the gameplay implications are a lot less clear, something we'll explore later. I switched it off pretty quick. A big part of Outlaws' mixed reception up front was its bugginess and glitches, coming from Ubisoft pressing the launch button a bit too early. I encountered some stuff, but playing it from beginning to end, those issues were relatively superficial. While bugs are annoying and it's frustrating that they needed maybe another month or two to polish the game up further ahead of the holiday season, the game's errors didn't ruin the experience or come anywhere close. The game's performance and moment-to-moment gameplay never felt any more obstructed or unpredictable than any other typical open-world game. Still, glitches were noticeable. You can glitch into environmental items like this rock in the tutorial early on that forced a reload. Elsewhere, I'm getting stuck in my speeder, which I thankfully liberate myself from. Nyx, a complicated virtual entity that must constantly latch and unlatch from Kay, but also follow her all the time, brings their own series of small issues. They glitch and loop in place. They have a tendency to warp to you for the sake of gameplay. They'll also just clip through the scenery, probably an artifact for that same necessity. Nyx once disappeared entirely after a cute shadow puppet sequence, only reappearing after a reload. I encountered at least one quest that was broken because I started on another quest in the same zone. It's the rejected quest in Mirogana for those keeping track at home. Here's this late game real-time cutscene that's just weirdly looping two of our protagonists for 15 seconds. I thought the game had crashed. Speaking of which, I had a couple crashes, but nothing unmanageable, especially compared to its peers, and you'll be making and losing a lot of friends in this game.
It's my brother,
What?
the man in the table. He took my eye, but I took everything else.
Yeah. I see the resemblance.
The open worlds of this galaxy aren't ruled by the need to conquer territory, but rather tasks that allow you to curry favor with the game's 4 criminal syndicates. You have the enigmatic Crimson Dawn, the hive-like Ashiga clan, the brutal Hutts, and then the Pikes, who are also, well, they're also pretty brutal, but they're a different group. Most of Outlaws' gameplay revolves around picking and choosing assignments with the 4 factions, which will boost or diminish your favorability with one versus another. As you bolster or tarnish your reputation with each syndicate, you'll gain a variety of perks. You'll get special outfit unlocks and merchant discounts or penalties. Out in the countryside, skipping through claimed territories means you will or won't get shot at while on your way through. Within cities, you'll gain greater access to their enclaves for quests, merchants, and sabacc tables. Those enclaves will be tiered with an outer section for civilians like you who are friendly to the syndicate, and an inner section featuring vaults filled with expensive goodies that require much better standing to access. Those vaults become their own complex quests, tasking you with acquiring a trio of keys scattered across the world before you can crack them open. Several quests required me to use stealth to access an enclave's inner tier when I only had access to the outer one. To reach one informant within the Crimson Dawn's enclave on Tashara, I used my privilege with them to get most of the way in, then snuck around some of the guards to reach the informant deeper inside. If you get caught in an enclave's inner tier, they'll toss you out of the enclave entirely, but hilariously, if you have a good standing with the faction or better, you can just walk back in and try again. It's very gamey. Similarly, if you need a quest item from a particular syndicate, you can sneak your way in to steal it, or you can complete some side quests to cozy up to them to get it more easily. Many quests in Outlaws are built to benefit the original quest giver and increase your standing with their faction, but many will provide a last-minute injection from an opposing faction that allows you to change the original outcome to favor them instead. That it allows you to peek at your reputation with each syndicate before making a choice gives many of these quests a meta element, where you may have been perfectly fine with turning it into the original quest giver, but you'd prefer to pluck your standing with the other party out of a lesser reputation band. There are similar choices within other narratives that offer reputation options too. This all sounds fine if a little basic at its core. The main quest line requires you to engage with this mechanic, and even if you decide to build up your standing with one group exclusively over the others, you'll still be instructed to work against them at some point as you're expanding to other worlds. I never got to experience the coolest benefits that the highest excellent syndicate ratings provide because it requires playing it in that very specific way. While the game eventually makes the interplay between the syndicates and the gameplay of gaming reputations feel worthwhile and an essential component of the experience, it initially feels pretty gamey. To that end, or really the end, you can pull off randomly generated contracts from the game's brokers that allow you to bolster your rating with any faction you want. I've heard that grinding these simple quests for a while can eventually allow you to gain top tier rankings with all of them at once. I can't confirm that because it sounds like an awfully boring way to play this game. Over the course of your travels, you'll encounter the bosses of each syndicate and do work for them personally, which makes them feel, I don't know, like a lesser deal, as though they only exist on this handful of planets. The thing is, I was never quite thrilled with this system. It's so entrenched and built out that you can't help but respect it, but you never move the needle very far with any task to make any meaningful difference. The plus side then is that none of your individual choices will single-handedly destroy your reputation with a faction either. This makes things more realistic, but it's also a lot less fun. There's less danger. It's difficult to reach the exceptional best rung with any faction, but it's also difficult to reach the worst rung either. Even though I had a bad reputation with at least one syndicate at any time, it was a rare, minor inconvenience. If I can put on my armchair game designer hat for a minute, it would be incredibly heckin' dope if the game weighted reputation-related tasks more heavily. When you're making that choice between benefiting Faction A, who issued your quest, and Faction B, who also wants that prize, the outcome usually results in 1 point to Faction A or 1 point to Faction B. But what if the choice were asymmetrical and elevated? What if instead of being 1 point for either faction, you also incur a 5-point penalty with the faction you don't choose? What if there was some actual threat in here that you could totally ruin your rep with, or really gain access with a faction? Or what if you didn't start the game with a dead center neutral reputation with all 4 factions? I mean, Kay makes this huge deal about the fact that she has a death mark as she crash lands on Toshara. Why does this danger never materialize? There are no bounty hunters out to find her, and no one recognizes her from the most wanted alerts either. After swiping her stolen identity card from Club Tarsus with a stormtrooper at the Imperial checkpoint in Mirogana, you never have to present ID again. Again, there's no danger here. This is a game called Star Wars Outlaws, and it immediately hand-waves away the most serious penalties from your initial exploits. Why? What if you started out with hostile reputations with all of the syndicates and had to pick which one to side with so you weren't being tormented at every possible moment? What if the game actually made less than stellar reputations with any syndicate legitimately dangerous? I hope some future patches upgrade the usefulness of the system, because until then it just feels like an interesting setup for something that doesn't provide a lot of payoff. While lots of games introduce you as a new character in a universe to justify all of the skill and knowledge building that happens over the course of the game, it feels great doing it in the Star Wars universe. There are so many different things you can upgrade to expand your toolset and help you around the galaxy. You upgrade your blaster, your speeder, your spaceship, and even your own abilities, all through separate gameplay loops and menu structures. There are cosmetic and skill boosting outfits that you can find across the universe in stashes, purchase outright from vendors, or receive for improving your reputation with the syndicates. On top of that, you can collect and wear outfit sets for combined stat bonuses. There are so many different mechanics involved with upgrading all these different things that it's pointless to try and list them all out here, but it's a lot. At a core level, each upgrade tends to require 3 parts. 2 parts are common items that are available from merchants or easily found across the world in batches that you may collect without even planning for it. The 3rd part will be something rare, typically the prize of a quest, similar to any token-based McDonald's Monopoly style game you've ever played. Many of your personal abilities are upgraded by completing checklists of normal stuff you already do in the game. I can see how finding these parts and feeling the dopamine hit that comes with unlocking new abilities is addictive in and of itself, but I didn't feel particularly compelled to upgrade stuff for the sake of upgrading stuff. The most important gameplay upgrades are practically handed to you by playing the main quest as is, so I never really felt compelled to seek out the other lesser ones, even if there's a lot of useful stuff out there. You'll find merchants everywhere in Outlaws. Some, like the Traveling Shuma, will have the rare stuff that you need for upgrades, but commerce in this game feels like shadow puppetry. It's definitely there, but its appearance is far more important than ever engaging it. You can lift so many materials for free from the environment and gain so many for completing quests and unlocking treasure caches that there's little point to the system. Outlaws is not some looter shooter or RPG where you're finding and upgrading your guns or trying to complete armor sets, for the most part. There are a couple of things you can craft, but this is not a crafting game. You have little use for items, so you have little use for your inventory screen, which this game dedicates a lot of menu space to for some reason. You have one primary weapon that you never run out of ammo for, while health vials and grenades are plentiful everywhere you're in combat with someone. Even if you are regularly topping off your back to vials and grenades regularly and buying every rare thing merchants offer, it's not hard to acquire money, as the tutorial highlighted. It shouldn't be a surprise then that I always had plenty of money, even early on. The most important reason to visit any merchant in this world was to sell off a bunch of useless junk that you've accumulated, and the game will even tell you is useless. You get money all the time. You're charged a fee every time you die, but even in the more difficult infiltrations where I was dying repeatedly, my financial stash was never in danger. If you've ever watched any of my other reviews, you know I'm not very good at games and I'm always screwing stuff up, so you have to believe me when I say that this game's a bit of a cakewalk, except when it's not, which we'll get to. It's kind of a shame then that there's nothing in this game that you'll ever need to invest in financially across this galaxy of opportunities.
You pulled it off. Guess I shouldn't be surprised. I heard you stole something much bigger than this. A ship. Someone's favorite ship. Someone important.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Before I played Star Wars Outlaws, there seemed to be some confusion about what content is actually in this game and where you can go, so here it is. Outlaws features 4 worlds that are a mix of new and familiar to Star Wars fans, which is symmetrical to the fact that there are 4 factions with headquarters and claimed territory spread across them. Hop in your spaceship and you can access the penned-off orbit space exterior to the planet, where you can do combat and work on space-based quests or visit a couple of space stations. This is also the medium by which you jump to and from other systems, so you can't fast travel from planet to planet from the ground. It's basically 8 zones of various sizes, organized in a way that isn't terribly different than Starfield's, but lacking any of the cutaway load screens, or at least dressing them up in plausible transit animations. Toshara is the semi-arid moon that Kay crash lands on early in the game. Its bucolic plains with water streaming through them are punctured by wind-sculpted desert cliffs. The Pikes dominate here from their base in Miragana, a city built under the base of a massive mushroom-shaped rock formation. It's here that you'll learn your crafts, embrace the joy of owning a speeder bike, and ponder how bored these Imperials are from their basic outposts that dot the landscape.
All clear.
This is a restricted area. Leave.
Kijimi's glow up here is actually appreciated. Like all of Episode 9's expensive rapid-fire inclusions, this frigid ice planet was given little space to breathe and a narrow window to be appreciated. While all of your work and play on Kijimi is locked into a single shivering city, it emphasizes the incredible effort required to stay warm and alive here. They do toss you a short tunnel sequence to justify using the speeder here though. Both the Ashiga clan and the Crimson Dawn have strong bases here. Akiva is a large humid jungle world that easily allows for stealth with lots of hidden details amidst its vast and thorough vegetation. With a speeder upgrade granted by the main story, you can slice right over the planet's seas and rivers to access isolated locations, but that usefulness is limited to this planet. Its big urban center, Mira City, features hut and pike enclaves, while the Empire maintains a massive haunting presence across the landscape. Tatooine is, well, it's Tatooine. It's the most famous planet in this universe, and it arrives in Outlaws to be represented yet again. Still, with the fidelity of the newest gaming hardware, it's so amazing to feel like I'm in an expansive desert that feels real. An immediate example is the fact that you land on a salt flat with hills residing on the horizon. It doesn't immediately feel like a game space where you're being funneled into an attention funnel. As a one-time Phoenix resident, it felt like they were modeling chunks of this planet on real-life locations like it. You also face the game's harshest HDR transitions as you move in and out of buildings, which is actually neat. Your experience on these worlds will be split between your urban surveying and cross-country questing. Each planet has a primary city and then some settlements scattered across a big natural landscape. Except Kijimi. The towns of Outlaws are the hubs of activity you expect from an open-world game. Except it's Star Wars. These give you the quest givers and merchants you want and desire, but most importantly, you need them. What's special beyond the fact that it's Star Wars are their special multi-level layouts, complete with backways and vents, regional aesthetics, and localized weather. These are tightly laid towns, evocative of the dense old world settings of Assassin's Creed, with portions controlled by the syndicates with the enclaves I mentioned earlier. You'll park the Trailblazer in the attached spaceport, allowing you to walk right in or out, while merchants to upgrade your ship and speeder typically reside nearby. But after a couple of hyperspace jumps, a tedium sets in. Once you strip away the unique geography and get over the shock of being in a new and different world, you'll notice how similar the function and layout of these cities are. It's like driving 1,000 miles from your hometown to end up in another city with the exact same banks, hotels, and restaurants. I understand it's designed to decrease the amount of time you're discombobulated when you arrive on each new planet. Having to learn an entirely new planet when you've just spent hours and hours getting used to the last one is kind of a task. But I kinda wish each city or each world had a more bespoke introduction or broader function that didn't make them feel so similar. It's great that each town has a reliable A, B, and C, but it would be great if one had an AB, and another had an AC, and another BD, and so on. Beyond a town's speeder restriction zone is a wraparound countryside that provides lots of space to gawk at. There's random encounters to engage in, other virtual entities moving around on speeders, and a whole lot more. It's where a lot of the game's fun is, and it's where you execute a lot of the quests you acquire in the city while gaining more along the way. With a tap of the D-pad, your speeder is summoned instantly, like a loyal pet dragon, allowing you to sail around the world similar to a CD Projekt Red game. Well, it summons most of the time. Sometimes you tap it and it doesn't pop up until you move a bit. Speeding between areas is fun, especially where it gives you chances to take tight turns and slam through corridors like the forests of Akiva or the tunnels of Tashara's Imperial Wind facilities at high speed. Randomly slamming into stuff sucks though, like rocks or indigenous animals. Flying off cliffs is its own fun kind of joy until you do it a bit too hard and things go bad. The lack of a camera centering button or any similar toggle that I could find was particularly irritating. I usually mount my speeder from a random angle and it doesn't automatically recenter until you've been on for a second or two. This seems like a small thing, but I mean, you get it. Zipping across these landscapes is so fun that I often forgot that you had a small selection of fast travel points to teleport to while on world. These were helpful in the late game when I was just trying to check off the last of my most important quests, but to Outlaws' credit, I rarely felt a pull to use them. You do get some cool customization options for your speeder, especially when every other speeder looks identical, but it'd be cool if there were more frame and body styles. Like the enclaves they maintain with the tight corridors of the game's towns, syndicates claim territory in the field too, which are punctured by outposts and bases. But don't get too excited, this isn't a deep feature by any means. You can't capture territory or liberate outposts, but you can check off pilfered treasure chests for completionist's sake. I guess that's fine. Depending on your appetite for reputation grinding, you'll return to these sites several times. Separately, when your reputation is low and they're popping off laser blasts at you, you have no response, really. I'm not the biggest fan of driving and shooting in video games, see every review I've done of an open worlder that features it, but Return of the Jedi taught us that when you're being pursued by hostiles on speeder bikes, you should at least be able to slow down and blast opponents from behind. Here, you can only run away, and that's not the coolest thing. The game really wants you to explore each world and get a feel for it and understand its landmarks and terrain rather than pointing you directly towards your destination. This is true whether you're in the bowels of a settlement or dampening your boots in a rural mud pit. Rather than pinpointing an artifact or door to open, quests will often provide a bubble around an area for you to search in. There's lots of feeling out city walls and cliff faces for ledges to jump to, tapping the Nix Vision button to uncover hidden switches and toggles, and scouring terrain for hidden entrances. Several missions will provide only vague geographic clues as to where to find them, which makes them feel old school and immediately more rewarding when you figure it out. The game also doesn't offer any breadcrumbing to navigate you to your destinations, which can be a bit of a pain in the ass considering the windy paths and high contrast elevation changes between you and your destination. All of these anti-hand-holding elements combined are a very effective way to get invested in the geography of these spaces, and honestly, are a huge source of fun in this game. On top of that, the stylish low-poly maps for outdoor spaces are really neat too. But this particular gameplay elements also feels like it's the only spot in the game that bets on some old-school mental homework versus being another set of streamlined options. All of this probing and exploration does lead to some awkward attempts to platform, climb, and otherwise traverse, where the game clearly wasn't designed to let you, which is a lot of it. This stands in firm contrast to the parts of the game where highlighted platforming sections and elements let you know exactly where you should be leaping into. Still, a little off-roading produces results from time to time. But sometimes the game is a little disingenuous. Here's this one quest where I'm searching buildings up and down for a motivation actuator for a broken droid within what's probably a 150-foot quest bubble. Here I am thinking it's probably just hanging out in the open for the picking, or on top of this building nearby, or even inside it, both of which are solutions to separate puzzles. But for all of my scouring and searching up and down inside this bubble, the solution is to just buy the part from the vendor nearby who's also within the bubble. That was incredibly unsatisfying. Outlaws does well to flesh out each world, making each one feel like they could be the star of their own game. So often I felt like I could actually visit these places because they're so wonderfully rendered and realized. Sadly, with how often I needed to use the speeder, I often felt like a tourist as I quickly zoomed through these locations, skipping over so much of the detail. It's a problem I highlight in Cyberpunk 2077 as well, with how beautifully rendered and multiplanar Night City is. Take all four of these worlds together, and it actually feels like there's too much geography in this game, proportionate to what it ultimately offers. Your stolen ship, the Trailblazer, is a rare, tough freighter. It signals its plentiful lore with paint chipped off worn edges and through its distressed materials throughout. Characters and Outlaws acknowledge the legend of the Trailblazer, and it's really cool how much attention the game gives it. You think it's just the ship you steal during a quick escape, but it's pretty interesting how much of a big deal your ship is. Apparently, despite the pleasant sound that your vessel has resume loaded with adventures, you don't ever seem to learn much about them. I mean, there's even a quest line involving its former owner that doesn't seem to cast much light there either. Why is this ship so damn popular? Who freaking cares? We get that it's a sturdy little ship, but it just looks like a freighter with a cool lounge up front. Does the game and its characters, or the developer and its storytellers, think gamers will have an issue if the Corellian freighter that serves as their base doesn't have a legendary reputation to rival another famous Corellian freighter in the saga? Or another famous Corellian freighter in the saga? Can't you make a ship legendary through your own actions instead of inheriting one with a track record? Of course, this phantom fame means you're not going to have access to other ships to serve as your home base either. Still, if we must be dealt the Trailblazer exclusively, at least it's a cool base of operations. It's awesome to walk in and out of it without load screens. It's a tight, winding ship that reflects its economy and utility. You chat with the crewmates you accumulate over the course of the main quest here, and it serves as host of many of the game's most important narrative moments. It's what you can expect from a base ship in a game like this. I wish you could customize your ship beyond the external dress and exhaust color. There's plenty of internal opportunities that would be awesome to modify or decorate, but, you know. Having a space yard around each planet to quest and battle in seems like a natural thing to have in a Star Wars game. Mercifully, you can transit to space and back without experience-breaking blank transitions, unlike a certain Bethesda RPG. I swear this is my last reference to Starfield's load screens. Maybe. Go watch my review. Each planet's orbiting space is penned in like a backyard and is about as large. Stray too far into the void and the game will force you back, but stray too close to the planet you're orbiting and it'll freeze the action and prompt you to land. It's not just a big vacuum of nothingness up there. There are fascinating structures, whether it's manufactured or natural, like Akiva's nebula cluster with its varying viscosity, or the debris field that floats over Tashara. Tatooine, though, there's basically nothing up there. Space combat is kinda rare, but it's a fun and tightly calibrated experience when it happens. It's a simple affair. You're not balancing power between your shields and lasers or whatever. There was the rare escort mission or battle with a cruiser, but it was mostly small-scale dogfights. Again, don't expect too much. These orbital pockets will also feature hotspots that contain treasures, which gives space quests an Everspace 2 vibe. None of this felt essential except for completionist's sake, which was true for a lot of the stuff on the ground as well. When you need to jump between systems, the act of punching it, where you push both sticks forward, is always cool. I mentioned earlier that there were 4 criminal syndicates in this game, but there are technically a few more. The Sixth Kin are a threatening presence early on, but they're hyper-local to Canto Bight, and they disappear pretty quick. Slero Zarek Besh is obviously a huge deal, and they have enforcers that look like they're wearing TVs for helmets, but they only show up in story missions, so they don't count. No, there's a 5th criminal syndicate out here in this universe. Shit, I'm talking about the Empire. The pristine black, white, and gray forces of the Galactic Empire serve as this game's police force, and like any police force in an open world game, you incur a wanted rating if you piss them off too much. You can break into their fortifications for treasure and objectives, but also to recover any fees they've collected for murdering you. Along popular routes, they've set up security barriers that they'll flip on when you've raised the heat too far. While it's frustrating to hit them at full speed because they'll kill your momentum if they don't kill you, it's absolutely hilarious when someone tailing you strikes them immediately afterward, then ragdoll over like a catapult. If you push too hard, the Empire will send death troopers for you, which I thankfully never had to meet face to face because I was dead long before them. The story enlists them for late game story missions, so you'll inevitably get to trade blaster fire with them, but they never seem like anything more than buffed up stormtroopers. In space, you'll battle TIE fighters somewhat regularly, but if you push the stakes too hard, they'll deploy an interdictor cruiser that'll prevent you from fleeing the system. Not an interdictor star destroyer, a cruiser. A crooked Imperial officer pulls you aside on Kijimi to let you know that you can pay her to clear your wanted rating with them. But the worst trouble I ever got into was hyperlocal to where I kicked their wasp nest and they either dispatched me quick or the action didn't extend far beyond it. Paying to clear my name never seemed necessary since you can't permanently bend your reputation with them like you can with other syndicates. Your relationship resets upon death. Since this takes place during the original trilogy, Imperial troops, vehicles, and facilities have infiltrated every last place you visit. They're everywhere. You quickly encounter them on Miragana at a checkpoint they've installed, but you'll make your way into so many of their facilities across the galaxy. Even if you're doing nothing offensive at all, their overwhelming presence and sheer strength they can summon at nearly any moment lines up with the terror they bring from the opening moments of A New Hope.
The Empire is after a Dawn archive. We think the logs in it could be useful for us. Logs have secrets, and secrets are good.
So I steal the archive before the Empire does. Where is it?
In space.
Space is big.
Kay, I will be honest. This is my first task. I don't know what I am doing.
So what do you actually do in this game? Outlaws tries to avoid the Ubisoft tendency to dress world maps with an overwhelming sea of activity icons by, well, dressing them as items in an overwhelming series of lists. I've broken them down into categories of my own distinction. The game's big quests are its marquee story events. These are the cinematic quests that introduce characters and factions and expand your access to the rest of the galaxy. We'll break these down in Chapter 7 when I spoil the hell out of the story, which involves setting up and pulling off a heist that finally doesn't involve the Death Star plans. The medium quests in here are the syndicate-oriented tasks that allow you to tweak your reputations with them, establish mechanics, and force you to meet Outlaws' cast of characters. I largely covered these earlier. Then there are the game's little quests that serve as most of its content, typically involving you acquiring an important widget or gear or whatever. Beyond allowing you to get acquainted with the nooks and crannies of this cast of planets, this is where you encounter the game's Metroidvania-esque access system. There are locations and treasures you can't access without the proper tool, which you receive from a quest in a higher tier. Treasures are like parts for upgrades and other cosmetic unlockables like pants. Unfortunately, the game doesn't warn you that you can't access specific places when it clearly knows that you don't have that specific tool or weapon. So I found myself screwing around a bit on some quests, trying to advance them when in retrospect, I clearly couldn't at that point. There are points on the map you can't get into without speeder upgrades, for instance. There's also no notice given when you can accomplish something once you've acquired a tool or skill after the fact. Good luck keeping tabs on that as your number of planets grows. To be fair to this system, even though it wasted a lot of my time trying to reach stuff I couldn't, the actual treasures were typically less valuable to me than seeing them checked off the map listing. It even justified spending more time deep inside strongholds and fortresses to find those treasures instead of just knocking out the objective and fleeing the scene. This is also the band of quests where you can overhear a conversation between smugglers in a bar outside Miragana about a stash hidden behind a waterfall nearby. There are so many quests you can acquire by becoming an interloper in other people's affairs. You can also buy intel from merchants that form their own quests, and there are those randomly generated contracts I mentioned earlier. Then there are the tiny quests, like randomly generated pirate raids that civilians will call out over the radio, allowing you to assist them against waves of baddies arriving on speeder bikes. These tend to happen in a handful of spots across the galaxies. A couple of one-off speeder racers let you test your bike skills against an opponent, but don't look for any kind of tournament structure or rankings. Meanwhile, merchants will be extorted by stormtroopers and other local law enforcement. And then, if you're absolutely bored, there are a whole bunch of hidden smuggler caches whose locations are only tipped off by a beeping and a vibration from your holo tracker tool that you get a third of the way through the game. But wait, there's more, like this really gamey side stuff. In my travels, I found a pair of arcade games, a shooter called Raven 6, which I translated from the original Orabesh, and a ball shuffling game. They're fun little distractions. There are a couple of meals Kay can eat with Nix, which are really just long sequences punctuated by quick time event gameplay. They're cute, but I don't quite understand the appeal. Then we get into the ways that you can gamble in the Star Wars universe by way of Outlaws. From the moment you reach Ram's Bar in the game's opening minutes, you have access to space horse betting. They're not called space horses, they're called fathiers, but that's not as cool to write about or say out loud. Since this is a Canto Bight sport, you may recall that these are sourced from Rian Johnson's The Last Jedi, the only truly good, artistic, or interesting film from the sequel trilogy. It was a film that had to make sense of J.J. Abrams' rehashing and mystery box storytelling in The Force Awakens, a film that is Star Wars equivalent to a Now music compilation being tossed in a blender. It's pretty, it's fun, but holy does it not make any sense on any kind of study. And if you badmouth The Last Jedi in the comments section, I will delete your comment twice. Each space horse race gives you a swath of randomly generated space horses and statistics about them, including their physical size, temperament, and performance in their past few races. Equipped with this information, you can bet on a winner under the delusion that you know how any of it matters to the end result, which is usually just you losing credits gambling on space horses. Real space horse gamblers win by searching the world for data pads that spill who's winning the next space horse race, because the entire sport is built on fixing races and gaming winners through shady deals behind closed doors. There has to be some other gambling going on in this game, some other pleasant distraction that will rob you of hours of your time. It's Sabacc time! I'm not usually one for in-game card games, but Sabacc is an absolute blast once you get hang of the rules and acquire a few more of the tokens. Sabacc is a game where you try to build the best card pair against up to 3 opponents. To swap cards, you spend coins, which go into a pot. You gain them back if you win at the reveal, but you lose them if you don't have the winning hand. Whoever has coins at the end of a round is the winner of the game. The game deals you 1 card from 2 decks, the Sand deck and the Blood deck, valued 1 through 6. Your goal is to get them to match values, 1 to 1, 2 to 2, and so on, which gives you a Sabacc. The lower the pair, the more valuable it is. If you can't acquire Sabacc, you want the lowest difference between the 2 values. If you have a 4 and a 6, that's 2, but if you have a 4 and a 5, that's 1. That makes Sabaccs important because the difference between them is 0. Like Sabacc, you want the lowest values of cards too. A 1 and a 2 is better than a 5 and a 6, even though the difference is still the same. In my experience, reveals where no one has a Sabacc are pretty rare, so good luck because even the cheapest Sabacc will beat even the best non-Sabacc pair. There are a couple of other cards. Imposters are wild cards where you roll a pair of dice and pick the value of that card. Psylop cards match what your other card is, guaranteeing a Sabacc. If you get a Psylop for both cards, that's a Psylop Sabacc, and that beats even the lowest face value Sabacc. Real advancement in the Sabacc realm relies on using and acquiring tokens that become personal modifiers. Many of the starting tokens are about reclaiming coins from your own pot or forcing others to spend their own, which can be used strategically to prevent other players from improving their hand, knock them out of the game relatively quick, or wound another player who's sitting on a bunch of coins. There are Sabacc tables across all of these worlds, but a few are higher tier ones, and a few are quest specific. Some tables will require you to use specific tokens, and lots will give you a specific token when you win there. But there are weird tables. The Ashiga Ringmaster at the Elite table on Kijimi kept throwing down the Cook the Books token in the first round, which inverts what cards you need to acquire. That can quickly put players like you out of the game. Cheats help out when you need them, like Nyx, who can spy on other players' cards. It helps if you know that your opponents have kinda crappy hands, so you're not stressing over trying to improve yours. You can also do stuff like acquire loaded dice to help with imposter rolls, or acquire a secret third card on a draw that you can swap in and out as you need it through the rest of the game. Other players can become suspicious if you fail cheat checks, which are minor games of skill, but I never failed enough times in a game to face the consequences of having a whole table turn on me. Many of your first Sabacc games feel clearly rigged in your favor for story purposes or to introduce you to the mechanics, which made them feel like being Homer at a Stonecutter's poker game. But then it's not in your favor and you have to actually learn how to play. Thankfully, the game provides some help pages to brush up on the basics. Speaking of which,
Straight from the, second mouth. That's good, right?
Oh, yes. I love watching the wheels of commerce in motion.
The quests of Star Wars Outlaws exist on a spectrum between its more linear Tomb Raider-esque action-adventure sequences and more open-ended infiltrations of strongholds like HUD enclaves and Imperial fortresses. Most are somewhere in between. Being a third-person open-world Ubisoft game, there are old-school climbing and traversal sections here, evoking mechanics and level design that stretch back decades to the earliest days of video gaming. That's not even to mention the publisher's own lengthy history of Assassin's Creed and Prince of Persia titles. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, I suppose. You're scaling walls, scaling ledges, latching onto fixed points for grappling hook swings with interesting physics. How often will you be hanging from an extrusion waiting for a hazard to chill out so you can cross past it? It feels very familiar. There are ladders, of course, and you can click in the left stick to speed climb or slam down them. This is a fantastic tool in high-stress situations, like when a small legion of enemies are shooting at you. Sometimes they're rolled up and placed on the edge of a cliff, requiring you to use nicks to roll it down to access those higher areas. You'll even have little sections to slowly shimmy between, like the costumed load zones of Thief 2014. The grappling hook is great, but the fact that they're often well above your head and outside your field of view isn't. Was I stuck on a few levels for a minute or two because I couldn't find the grappling point to move me forward? You bet. You get some control on this line to ascend and descend, but you can also use physics to swing to a location that isn't in a straight line from the ledge you're jumping on. Outlaws takes advantage of this sometimes, but it'd be fun if they did more with it, especially in the high cliffs of Tatooine with all the climbing you're having to do otherwise. As simple as these platforming mechanics are, the game does its best not to paint its platforming targets and ledges with bright hazard paint. I bring this up because the set dressing was often so convincing that there were sections where I'd be hanging on something and wonder where my next ledge was, and I'd struggle to find it. But there are also plenty of times where the game wants you to just leap between platforms, like just run and jump. This seems like a weird complaint, but in the other 99% of the platforming, the game pretty effectively communicates that there's a button press thing to move to. Even if you can't find those ledges or edges, those portions are firmly signposted. So when the game wants you to make a really long jump, it's so weird, because the game doesn't communicate that Kay can actually jump far enough to bridge the gap. So yeah, there were sections where there's a lip out to another ledge, and lacking any prompts, I'd search the rest of the level for a workaround and not find it before coming back and just trying to jump it. The other issue that the game's strictly defined platforming creates is that outdoor exploration can feel very odd in spots. This illegal platforming, where I was awkwardly climbing on stuff that wasn't flagged as platforms until I succeeded, had me hoping I didn't get Kay stuck in the environment. The game tries to dance around this by actually implementing outdoor platforming sections and having you seek them out, but these fixtures contrast with the rest of the world's naturalistic look and features, and looking for their telltale differences from the surroundings does zap some of the magic of exploration. On the other side of this spectrum is a series of immersive sim-esque playgrounds where you have quite a bit of freedom gameplay-wise to accomplish your objectives. Coming from a game like Deus Ex or even older Ubisoft games, you may be expecting more mechanics or more named characters and specific consequences to your actions, but I think it's probably the most compelling gameplay in Outlaws. An ImSim is defined by your ability to play as you choose, and you kind of get to do that here. There are plenty of opportunities to explore and find alternate paths. You can hack stuff, stealth is very important, and there are plenty of vents and ladders to get around. When things get heated and your inner war inspector starts getting frustrated, you can blast your way through a lot of situations too. There are lots of interesting puzzles and plenty of reasons to use your Nyx vision to find stuff, but I wish these had a little more variety, just a couple more permutations. How many times did I need Nyx to open a shutter so I could quickly shoot the thing it's covering? I tagged 8 while cataloging footage, but I know there were more. In contrast, this one-off dual switch puzzle was neat. Each Syndicate's enclave will have ways to battle or stealth your way in, but they'll also have a more subtle back way to sneak in if you're not on the greatest terms with the guards up front. Like enemy robot control panels in other games, these vents and narrow shimmy sections are something I usually found after the fact. I can't quite put my finger on it, maybe it was an issue with the FOV, but tied to my issue with the tiny enemy activity warnings, enemies could attack from so many angles, horizontally as well as vertically, that it felt very easy to be wiped out by an unseen enemy. Later on, this came with instant death sniper sections. The 21:9 aspect ratio that I quickly switched away from seems like it could be a possible fix, but a pulled back camera or an FOV slider would be nice here too. The camera pulls in frustratingly tight when you're in intimate settings outside of combat that feels claustrophobic in a way it typically doesn't in games like this. This game also really needs a shoulder camera switch button like the one Remedy implements in their third-person action games. It wouldn't be just for the action sequences where you're behind a column looking one way while the camera is looking around the other, but for improperly framed conversations that squish Kay on top of whomever she's talking to in the same gridded third. Where the game's ImSim elements may seem lacking is in the fact that you have to engage the game's stealth. You have to. You must always start with stealth, and stealth becomes your primary method for infiltrating locations. That's because Kay is extremely vulnerable. You're always seeking cover and alternate methods of transit or escape, even as you upgrade your offensive and defensive capabilities. You may get really good at combat and hacking as a player and a character, but I'm not convinced those skills will ever be good enough to become your primary mode of gameplay. Prove me wrong in the comments below. Like Outlaws platforming gameplay, the stealth mechanics also feel like a polite upgrade of some very old gameplay. You'll be watching patrols and waiting for gaps. You'll be looking at enemies standing in strange configurations that don't make any sense, like this pair of stormtroopers standing on the ramparts of fortification, staring at each other, saying nothing. Or here are enemies that won't flinch when I take down a coworker next to them. There are a lot of strange moments in this game's stealth that remind you that this is a video game and not a reflection of what a person sneaking around a pace occupied by human beings would actually do. Enemies will still give up their search given enough time regardless of how much death and destruction you've caused. We understand that these are the way things are because realism isn't very fun here. There are lots of cameras mounted around the place with visible view cones that you can send Nix to disable from time to time. Chest-high walls and barriers in here are only about 80% reliable, so there's still a chance that enemies will spot you. It's kind of a relief that these barriers can't keep you secure indefinitely because it forces you to keep moving. When you've aroused suspicion, yellow caution diamonds will pop up over your opponent's heads, and in that phase you can still ditch them relatively easily. Once they confirm you exist, those diamonds go red and you better be ready for a fight. This system of scaring patrolling staffers also utilizes Star Warsian orchestral stingers to great effect to highlight how precarious your situation is and how badly you're about to screw things up if you're not more careful. Thankfully, this goes hand in hand with the game's compartmentalized stealth. Unlike the popped balloon style of stealth that we see in other games like Cyberpunk, you can dispatch a room of enemies in Outlaws without alerting the entire base. I mean, you can still fuck up and alert the entire base, but with a tiny bit of strategy, you don't have to. With a single grenade, you can take out all the folks in a room and move on to the next encounter without someone in the next room or down the hall going, "Huh? What? What's going on in there?" and escalating the conflict. Once an alarm has been pressed, and before you can shut the system off, you'll have waves of enemies streaming in until you're dead, or you can escape. This makes destroying or trapping alarms, or disabling those who are about to activate alarms, so much more important. If you mind your P's and Q's and avoid escalation, you're free to knock down the installation's finite number of opponents. My favorite method, if you've been watching all the way back to my Thief series review, is a good thwacking from behind. You'll find a parallel here, of course. Wait for an enemy to approach while in stealth and press a button to take him out. If you fail the one button takedown, you can still land a few swift melee hits to accomplish the same thing. While melee is a powerful tool, you thankfully also get a stun shot for enemies up close or at a distance that slowly recharges. Just be careful, because people will visually notice these attacks, the same as blaster fire. You can't move bodies here, so you have to live with the fact that you've also generated a thing for wandering enemies to be worried about. Beyond that, you'll hopefully learn to use Nix's distract move to pull guards from their posts so you can sneak behind them. Maybe you'll whack them, maybe you'll just try and reach some place you're trying to get to, like a turbo lift or a vault. This really helps when you're dealing with the Hutts and their Gamorrean guards, who are built like tanks and are immune to your usual tools and attacks. Naturally, Because I have to compare this to an MSIM, I have to elaborate on the persistent network of vents that allow you to sneak in, out, and around facilities without having to punch through the front door. There's also tall grass to duck into to stay hidden, which evoked memories of the Outer Worlds. Indoors, there are steamy vents that do the same thing. You have so many mechanics in this stealth module, even from an early point in the game, that it can be very easy to not use them all effectively. As I played, I truly felt like I had a kind of mastery over it all without needing to blow up everything or kill everyone, like I would in other games. When stealth breaks down, and I'm not even sure a no-kill run is actually possible across this open-world campaign, you'll be breaking out your blaster to mow down foes, Imperial and otherwise. Thankfully, combat in Outlaws is so compelling that you won't feel too bad when your careful approach inevitably fails, and you have to take out the trash. You obviously have your fists for melee combat, but without the element of surprise, odds are good that you'll face a relatively quick death. Good luck against multiple opponents. It's possible, but, well, good luck. Real talk. Combat starts with a base blaster that you can modify to deliver different kinds of damage, like control, I guess. The game has a really fun way to switch between these blaster modes both visually and gameplay wise. The base mode is a Star Wars gun, and it looks and feels good not just because of how well it takes out enemies, but how authentically Star Wars it is. Your blaster's secondary Ion mode allows you to disable robots and shields and temporarily stun human opponents before you switch modes to finish the job. It took a minute to link this mechanic way back to my time playing X-Wing and TIE Fighter back in the 90s. The final Power mode allows you to knock out groups of enemies or one-shot dudes with a charge shot, which is vital for late game encounters. Hilariously, charging it up and launching its explosive bolts looks like the gun is hawking a loogie. For those pining for the glory days of Gears of War, a QuickTime event allows faster or slower reloads that are enhanced as you upgrade your skills. You can pick up secondary weapons from downed enemies and gun racks like more powerful blaster rifles, grenade launchers, sniper rifles, and more. The trade-off for these specialty weapons is that they have a small, finite supply of ammo, and you drop them easily when climbing or descending, even without intending to do so. Grenades, technically thermal detonators in the Star Wars universe, but we'll call them grenades here, aren't easy to use for a reason. You can only carry a couple at a time, but they have no dedicated use button. You can't just chuck these things out between salvos of blaster fire. Instead, they're inside a menu and bogart the player's full attention. I don't quite know how they justified this, but it does force you to pay more attention to and strategize your use of crowd-clearing explosives. As I mentioned at the top of this video, there's a theatricality to using grenades too. It doesn't feel like you're killing people in this game, it feels like their actors are being relieved of their roles and they're being sent to their trailers. If you can spot the warning, you can take out dudes as they're priming their own grenades and they'll detonate on them, which is so awesome. All in all, no game has felt like Luke, Chewie, and Han's clumsy firefight to rescue Princess Leia quite like this game. You can also send Nix to set off explosive barrels planted throughout the world, but this typically takes a bit longer than just shooting it yourself, so you'll have to make some choices. Also, some of them aren't actually explosives you're triggering, but smoke screens. They help you move around, but you know. Outlaws is not ashamed of ragdolling, and there are plenty of absurd deaths to go around, which is just fun to watch. And then there's the rest of the story. Slicing is this game's hacking, and learning how to do it is mandatory. This minigame revolves around resolving a 3 to 5 glyph combination by guessing and testing from an on-screen pool of glyphs. It's a bit like Wordle. If you select the right glyph and it's in the right position, it'll set with an aqua color. If it's the right glyph and it's in the wrong position, it'll be yellow, giving you a chance to set it right in the next round. I truly felt like there was something missing here because it always felt too easy with no fail states. I'm not sure if I upgraded something early on to do this, but even as I kept getting the combination wrong and kept trying new combinations as I ran out of glyphs, I never failed, and it never kicked me out, and it certainly didn't seem to raise an alarm, or any alarm that I noticed. I would just keep guessing, and then eventually win. Another puzzling aspect of the slicing minigame is the interface. When you access a computer, it initially presents its options and switches. Some of these computers are unlocked, and you can just use them to immediately turn off cameras, unlock doors, and whatever. But when you need to hack the terminal, the game gives you this dinky little animated finger that points out the slice button command to open the hacking minigame. It doesn't feel very realized, like it's a hidden option. If it automatically dumped you to the hacking minigame, or if it did a better job of highlighting the need to hack the terminal, it would seem a lot better. The other side of this digital access coin is lockpicking, which you use often to get into rooms and other secured treasures. This is accomplished with a mechanically simple rhythm game with no fail state, where you press a single button in time with a pre-programmed sequence. I thought it was really fun, and it didn't overstay its welcome. It's simple until it becomes kinda difficult. The infiltrations you pull off for missions eventually got tedious for me, in large part because of, and yes, we're finally here, the less than stellar checkpointing. Several mandatory quests in this game, as well as the inner tiers of Syndicate enclaves, feature no-fail stealth sections where you can't shoot your way to victory, and if you get caught, you'll find yourself all the way back at the beginning of the section or the mission entirely. This would force me to lose up to 10 and 15 minutes of progress at a time. Granted, you'll move through these sections quicker with learned knowledge, but it emphasizes the fact that a lot of this game is built on conceding to memorization and routine rather than intuition. It sucks. Infamously, even when Kay can whip out a blaster and start mowing down troops in sections that aren't stealth only, as the game exists right now, you can still be reset to the beginning of a mission upon death. This is particularly frustrating when you're deep inside an Imperial stronghold and have spent a considerable amount of time exploring the place, flipping switches, hacking terminals, looting boxes, carefully capping fools, and otherwise wandering around. All of that is gone upon death. As a result, bigger infiltrations often started as fun exploratory adventures, but gradually morphed into frustrating sequences of precise, self-choreographed routines on subsequent loads. This curse is only somewhat lifted when you accomplish specific mission objectives, because the game will toss you a checkpoint bone then. This is frustrating on its face, but it's also not an issue in other actual immersive sims because they allow for save scumming. Make a mistake there, and you can quickly reload to a manually set save point a few moments back to try again. You can't do that here, and it's not hard to understand why. Outlaws doesn't put any pressure on you to ever save manually. Ever. It is constantly auto-saving, so you're never too far from what you're doing. Usually. It only stops doing this during quests, the sections of the game where moment-to-moment progress is more unpredictable. Not only does it not autosave during these sections, you also can't manually save either, which theoretically ameliorates any chance of soft-locking yourself by saving before a bad decision you can't get yourself out of. This is a trait of actual immersive sims, but you kinda get over it because it's a problem you create and you have no one else to blame for your stupid decisions. What's also frustrating is that any death you face in this process will confusingly set you further ahead or further behind than you expect. The game will remember that you've accomplished some tasks but not others, usually the important ones. The game may still count the couple of treasures you've unlocked, but then you'll still need to hack specific terminals again or reach mission-specific areas deep within the facility again. Similarly, there were times where I died trying to find the next checkpoint of a mission, and upon revival, it placed me right in front of where I needed to be, however far away that was, which is a little disorienting. I understand that holistically, people thought that the infiltrations of Cyberpunk 2077 with its myriad of quests were repetitive, but the narrative reasons why you were doing them were so much stronger there than in Outlaws, and I felt I had more latitude in gameplay and mission structure to resolve issues. Outlaws is far more simplified and far more punishing with its save system, but I still had a lot of fun when the game wasn't beating me up. As they keep the patch train rolling, it's my hope that this specifically becomes a more fun experience.
Gadik made a mistake. You think I wanted him to get picked up?
You left him behind, Kay. Now he has to choose prison or the Empire.
Easy. Gadik knew the risks, okay? I work better alone. Always have.
That sounds like Rico, not you.
Completing Star Wars Outlaws main quests from the moment I booted up to the end of the credits sequence, a point where I felt I was effectively done with this game, took me about 50 hours. Not only was I able to close out the game's story, but I also knocked out a whole bunch of side quests and periphery stuff too. Even with nearly 65 hours on the clock as I write this, I still haven't completed all of the content in this game by far. I've spent the review to this point going over what you do in the game, but something I never quite grasped is why, and when you do these things. I think the game just moves so fast that I took it all in stride and trusted it was making the most of its storytelling muscles. But sitting down after the fact to make this review and cataloging the footage, I found myself going back over it several times in spots, just trying to make sense of its biggest flaw: its story. As a channel, I've moved away from recounting the beats of a story note by note, because that's often a cheap way to pad out the runtime of the video, but for this game, I feel it's necessary in order to understand why it's a problem. I know I put a spoiler tag up front, but this is the section of the review where I'm going to get into very heavy spoilers. So if you're planning on playing the game, I would skip this chapter for now, and I'll provide a time code for the conclusion that follows. For those who have already completed it, I want to dive deeper into this to understand what this game is doing, or rather what it isn't doing. So let's recap how Kay got into this whole situation. Starting out, the game rushes to introduce you to Underworld Kingpin Sliro and his Zarek Besh, and most importantly, our Outlaw. We already know that Outlaws has problems with its compressed intro, but the open world game that you slip into afterward really thins out the narrative as you play through most of the game, leaving the story backloaded as well. While on the intro planet of Canto Bight, the game's second mission has Kay, remember, an unsuccessful amateur, successfully infiltrate Sliro's cliffside mega mansion and proceed to reach his deeply hidden and highly secure vault. Remember again, Sliro is a really big, really popular, really bad guy, so for her to be as successful as she is, while her team is so far in the background out of sight, is actually kind of nuts. But why is Kay even doing this? Why are you even here? Your contact and handler for this quest, Denyon, explains that you're attacking Sliro's vault because of a fabled fortune within.
Go make us all rich.
It does seem a bit too good to be true, though. Denyon and her crew drop you off on the edge of the estate with no plan, no stated size of the prize, and only vague instructions. Something about this story definitely felt amiss right away. Now, the armchair scriptwriter in me thinks of how cool it would have been if you actually stumbled upon and then stolen Sliro's vast fortune with a group of strangers in this game's second hour. You would have then spent the rest of the game eluding the vast galactic empire as well as the universe of underworld syndicates that are trying to find it. Despite the comfort of more money than you've ever experienced in your life 1,000 times over, you would have also had to establish trust with this group of strangers you just pulled this off with, who are now the most wanted criminals in the galaxy. You know, outlaws. While the story could have also been largely about Sliro and revelations about him that we'll get into, you could have also swayed favor with various groups and individuals with your new vast pool of wealth and the tasks you can accomplish with it, like staying just ahead of your enemies, something rich people get to do in the real world. This would have been such an effectively weird counter to the typical rags to riches heist game/story where you spend the entire main quest building your skills in your epically staged attempt to acquire that wealth. But none of this is what happens here, so, you know, we can put that in the dreams drawer forever. What actually happens is that once you reach the antechamber of Sliro's vault and access the primary control panel, instead of revealing a vast fortune or piles of rare coins in a Scrooge McDuck vault to dive into, a second door opens to reveal a prisoner who is part of the Rebel Alliance. The rest of the team arrives and they talk cryptically about what actual thing of value is supposed to be down here.
Asara, did you find it?
No. The stories about Sliro and Zarek Besh, they're all true.
It turns out that Denyon and her crew are also part of some chapter of the Rebel Alliance. This all happens so fast that it's easy to miss that they're foreshadowing what's to come in the back end of the game, while Kay and the player are both confused about getting paid. This Rebel crew also doesn't seem interested in accessing the main vault where all the money is supposed to be, despite making it this far. Instead, Denyon stun blasts Kay, leaving her for Sliro to find. Sliro arrives with a welcoming party and you escape after a brief interrogation. For all the trouble Denyon put you in, you get that galaxy-wide death mark and barely escape the compound with the Trailblazer, which is a huge deal that we already know about. This is where the game loses me a bit. You escape Canto Bight's tutorial zone and crash land on the moon of Toshara because in the rush of it all, Kay just needs to pick somewhere and punch it. The game sets Sliro in the background and you spend your time on Toshara trying to fix up the ship. Neither the game, nor Kay, nor the mechanic Waka, who initially tries to knock you out, provide much of a rationale for why repairing the Trailblazer is such a big deal, or why it's your primary task while you're building favor with the Moon's factions. Maybe it's to establish her barely gained independence and potential as a thief? Maybe? I can only speculate because her motives are never really explored. She makes no big plans or anything. But why is understanding this such a huge deal to me? Because according to my footage, I spent the next 15 hours of this game, making for the first 17 hours in total, on this huge tangent that's essentially a scavenger hunt for Waka's parts so he can fix the Trailblazer. It's not until 17 hours into this game, when I'm wandering around an ancient shipwreck trying to find a compatible navigation computer that will allow the Trailblazer to jump to other systems in the galaxy, that it introduces ND5, your robotic co-protagonist. It's a full third of this game before it presents the other character on the cover besides you and Nyx. I can only speculate, but it seems that at some point earlier in development, Outlaws had you wandering around the shipwreck of the Castellan, where you encounter ND5 and acquire the Trailblazer's nav computer a lot earlier than you do. My only proof is the fact that the Toshara tangent is so long and disconnected from the game's marquee storyline featuring Sliro and Zarek Besh, but a couple of tutorial prompts will pop up while navigating the wreck that highlight features I've already been using for well over a dozen hours by that point, like the importance of using Nyx vision to solve puzzles. Is it possible to reach this shipwreck a lot earlier? Yeah, if you're a speedrunner, but I don't think the average player is going to get there much quicker than I did because Toshara becomes an important setting to establish the game's open world, its gameplay loops, and its many mechanics. It really wouldn't surprise me that they started with the story and then pegged its progress to different milestones on different worlds, but then didn't adjust the pacing much after that. Again, I'm speculating, but I think Toshara was originally a much smaller segment, and as the number of gameplay elements expanded and the number of factions you needed to build relationships with grew, Toshara became this big bubble of content that places the main story deeply on hold, like Freezer in the Garage on hold, and really and unhelpfully distorted its pacing. Returning to the Trailblazer from the shipwreck, remember I'm a third of the way through the game at this point, Kay finally meets ND5 in person, as well as his boss Jalen Vrax, who proposes the heist that unceremoniously becomes the primary thrust of the game, like it were just another quest chain offering from Cyberpunk 2077's Mr. Hands. And what is that heist? It's Sliro's vaults. Again, Jalen wants you to go back and actually get behind that primary vault door this time. Both characters recognize that you've already tried this and Sliro will have stepped up his security substantially. To that end, Jalen substantiates the prize, 157 million credits. Somehow, Kay still signs on despite the fact that the rebels didn't care about cracking the inner vault earlier. Jalen, ND5, and Kay all agree that they'll need a new crew with defined roles to pull this off, despite the fact that you had one of these the first time around and you still made it almost all the way through single-handedly. I thought this was a weird setup when I played it, and watching this footage afterward, I thought it was even weirder. Having you go back to Sliro's mansion on such a flimsy premise felt like I had taken crazy pills. Here we are, watching Kay accept this job yet again, knowing something is clearly amiss between what the characters aren't doing or what the storytelling isn't accomplishing. The game must go on, I suppose. And so, Star Wars Outlaws officially becomes a heist game. Now, I have some big issues with Grand Theft Auto 5 because of its really cheesy, tone-deaf writing, but where it succeeds as a heist game is in how effectively it structures its series of heists that comprise its main storyline. Its missions, whether you're setting up the heist or pulling it off, are bespoke, made specifically for their purpose. It created a real sense of progress and tension as you gather tools, recruit teammates, and surveil your targets. Its characters are interesting and bring something to the arc of the operation from planning to getaway. Star Wars Outlaws isn't that. The missions that set up the heist just feel like chains of the next thing I have to infiltrate or explore in a linear manner. You get little blurbs of text as you warp to new worlds explaining what just happened to set up the heist, as if the game knows it wasn't really establishing this while you were on the planet doing the actual work. So, now you have to build a crew. The crew you gather for Jalen's task are a group of interesting partners. Ankh is the explosives expert that you have to rescue from the Ashiga clan's debt mines, more specifically, their weapons factory. Her liberation is only truly possible because of a brewing civil war between the clan's queen and her daughter, who is being aided by the Crimson Dawn. These mostly underground levels filled with shadowy platforming and firefights in the dark felt like they took forever. Gadik is Kay's former friend from Canto Bight who wound up working for the Empire after something went bad back home and she left him behind on a job. This is supposed to be some kind of emotional moment or some important part of their relationship, but Gadik doesn't seem to care, and neither does the game. A technical genius, he accidentally developed a killer droid for the Empire that was too killer, so you spend a chunk of your time on Akiva dealing with it after rescuing him from deep inside an Imperial facility. Rico is Kay's mom, an opportunist who left Kay when she was young, telling her that she wouldn't become much of anything in this trade because she wasn't very good at it. This becomes apparent to the player as we see Rico's attempts to teach Kay in a series of flashbacks. Jalen brings her on as a second slicer somewhat randomly before you set out on your final quests, and this obviously creates some interesting but extremely short-lived tension.
This is just like old times, huh?
Is it? Better find the floor plans before you cut and run.
I was just saying... Never mind.
Asara is that member of the Rebel Alliance you rescue from the original Heist. He's a Twi'lek. I don't know, he's there. ND5 is the badass killer robot that Kay grows really attached to. It happens in a way that feels very contrived, so the game will have at least 2 relatable characters, even if they dutifully adhere to Star Wars archetypes. After a battle on Tatooine, he begins to revert to his original Clone Wars era programming, and she sees his recovery through to the end. He pokes and prods at her over the course of the game, asking her questions about her history, her family, even expressing his disappointment when Jalen brings Rico onto the job. You chat with him often, and his responses are extremely helpful, coldly dismissive, or both. He's loyal to Jalen because of an installed restraining bolt, something that becomes an issue later on in the story, naturally. Altogether, I don't feel like I connected with these Heist members in the slightest, a crew that I spent most of the game questing to organize. Outlaws does give you some time to talk with each character and establish them a little further, but they feel less like partners and more like trinkets to collect. And then ringleader Jalen's got those slimy, I'm the assistant manager vibes. Jalen Vrax is a rich guy who makes a big deal about targeting other rich guys who are profiting off the chaos going on in the galaxy, and Sliro's one of them. That you're working with one envious rich dude to wipe out another rich dude is gross, but also an interesting approach that this game doesn't want to elaborate on. It's something that the hyper-gamified reputation gaming between the syndicates doesn't really nail either. Finally, because I have to talk about the villain, Sliro is great. His and Kay's performances are the best in the game, and I love them. He's kind of like Alan Rickman if Alan Rickman were chewing up the space criminal scenery, which makes it that much more frustrating that he gets such little screen time. He gets just enough narrative presence to twirl his mustache, and that's about it.
Partners? Weren't you listening? I'm starving. It's time to eat.
After reaching the point of no return marker in the narrative, you and Rico board a stolen Imperial shuttle to pilfer the master key to Sliro's mansion from the guy himself. You arrive at an Imperial station to retrieve it from his bedroom during what's supposed to be a deal between parties that he's orchestrating. In the process, you discover that Sliro is actually, dun dun dun, an Imperial director. Sliro is a rank-and-file Imperial officer who built Zarek Besh with Imperial funds to gain access to and track down the Rebel Alliance. At least attempt to, because he's not very successful. Playing through Tatooine's story missions, the game drops hints about this through Zarek Besh's dealings with the Empire and the Hutts. Of course, the fact that Zarek Besh is such a rare background presence in the game should have also been a tip-off. With Sliro's master key in hand, you travel to Canto Bight and single-handedly knock out the security detail to his mansion in an open-ended combat puzzle. You then spend most of the heist in the bowels of the facility, sneaking your way through a dark hangar and maintenance access, a lengthy sequence hindered by no-fail stealth sequences, followed by a series of shootouts. Yay. While the crew have specific tasks, they happen almost exclusively in cinematics and off-screen actions. There are no special task-related in-game moments as you're playing through it. It's just the same stealth, platformer, action gameplay you've been engaging with this whole game so far, just in a different wrapper. The entire Heist is this way. It's a big bummer, honestly. All of the parts of this that you play feel like busy work. This is supposed to kinda be the climax of the game, and here you are dodging even more patrolling guards and navigating platforming sections with nearly zero sense of spectacle. There's no tension, little ownership of my role as a character, and no feeling that things could actually go wrong at any moment. You just keep pushing, and any opposition is just pushed right over. There are no costumes on this mission, or going over roles, or things to memorize, etc. Sliro confronts you with his Zarek Besh baddies, his hired gun Vale turns on him, you blow through his vault door, and you finally have the prize. Now you have to escape by shooting your way through an evacuated casino floor. Racing to the Trailblazer with a floating, glowing crypt didn't feel like some big triumph, it felt like, ugh, yay, finally, this is over. This was such a miss, the whole thing. It's so standard, unimaginative, and weird to play too, which is disappointing considering this is a AAA Star Wars game that had so much material to draw inspiration from and money to make their ambitions reality. Grand Theft Auto V came out over a decade ago, and it's the second best-selling game of all time. Surely Massive and Ubisoft would have played it at some point and could have drawn inspiration about how those heists have become some of the most compelling scripted gameplay of the past ever without directly copying what they did note for note. Surely they'd play it and know what they were doing, for Outlaws wasn't quite up to snuff. Even Andor, another Star Wars property, showed us how right a heist can be set up and executed in this game, and it's like Massive and Ubisoft went, what? In the end, the only thing I felt truly got stolen was my time and patience. The resolution of this story campaign compresses everything so tightly, with such a ceaseless series of tasks, that it was more frustrating than anything after such an underwhelming, tedious trip to Sliro's vault. It was a bit like the ending of The Return of the King. You know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. That 157 million credit vault, turns out there's no money in there at all. Again, it seems that everyone on the crew was in on the fact that the prize of Sliro's vault was his codex, a mechanical orb/USB drive that holds a ton of illicit information that Sliro has spent years harvesting from inside and outside the Empire that's incredibly valuable to lots of people. Jalen announces that he's going to turn this over to the Empire for a payday. Kay has a crisis of conscience and decides against supporting this. After spending the whole game balking at the thought of helping the rebels in their war, this is truly the game's big character development moment. ND5, who's supposed to be her pal, is still under Jalen's direct control thanks to Jalen's restraining bolt. ND5 stuns Kay, she's very good at getting stunned, and she wakes up trapped in the Trailblazer's escape pod until the other crew members pop in to save her. They would cut and run, but they're in the hangar bay of a Star Destroyer, and she still wants to rescue ND5 because the game so desperately wants to cement that familial connection between them. They concoct a plan to solve both issues by acquiring a stormtrooper outfit and penetrating the routines of the Star Destroyer Revelator to intercept Jalen and now Sliro, who has been summoned here for a meeting. In the process, Outlaws reveals that Jalen and Sliro are brothers, and by turning Sliro's malicious cachet over to the Empire, they're giving Jalen the Zarek Besh Syndicate to do as he sees fit. It's a huge act of revenge to cap a lifelong story about backstabbing between rich siblings who each use the power and influence of the Empire to fulfill their own motivations. Truly appreciating this conclusion requires some recall of the very brief anecdote Sliro gives at the very beginning of the game, many dozens of hours ago.
You know, my brother was heir to the family fortune. He's gone now. Do you remind me of him?
Kay, who is 10 feet from this whole revelation, decides to toss away her helmet to reveal herself to everyone and mix things up. She doesn't shoot the truly evil Jalen after he kills his brother, but instead enters a series of easy fail action sequences to try and save ND5, which is still 100% her priority. She succeeds, but this is followed by another series of on-foot and then space combat sequences that have you taking down Jalen and the Revelator all together. I wouldn't have been surprised in the slightest if the Death Star 2 showed up immediately afterward, and we had to take that down too. And that's it. Everyone goes their own way. K and ND5 opt to not get involved with the matter of the Codex, and after the credits roll, you're dumped back to Tashara to mop up the rest of the game's content. As I said earlier, so much of Outlaw's story makes sense in real time as you play it, but with any kind of scrutiny, it's clearly kind of a mess. It lacks much gravitas, fails to characterize its cast, and ultimately doesn't accomplish much except tantalize the player to accomplish a whole lot of busy work across a quartet of worlds. When and where this story has a presence largely bookended to the beginning and end of the game, it's not great. I just reviewed Starfield earlier this year, and I'm wondering how and why these developers can write and then continue to commit to these miscalculated narratives all the way through production. I get that games take a while to make, especially the big expensive ones, and stories are probably written early on to serve as the neck that turns the production head that will follow for years to come. But come on, guys, come on! This game wastes so much of your time having you hit Sliro's vault twice for really thin reasons. It's plausible that Jalen has you going back because the rebels knew they couldn't get into the inner vault without an explosive or another key, which they didn't have. But because they don't explain this at any point, I spent a lot of the game wondering why the hell you didn't just get the job done in the first place and why you needed to go back. If the prize is the 157 million credits, why didn't Sliro have it moved after the rebels successfully infiltrated his mansion twice, once with Asara, the second with Kay and Denyon? If the prize is the Codex, which it winds up being, I really have to wonder why Sliro didn't move it then, when he runs Zarek Besh and should have plenty of other highly secure places to stash this elaborate piece of blackmail. It would seriously be easier to move than 157 million credits. Why would you keep it there and not somewhere else in deep cover, requiring an elaborate amount of espionage and spycraft to find it again? I'm not one of those plot hole weirdo people. I've just tried to make sense of this story and have had to conject narrative bridges in the process. But then, why was Sliro a danger to the universe? He spent millions of Imperial credits, a drop in the bucket, to build Zarek Besh, and it's an also-ran syndicate. Jalen funded a heist to retrieve Sliro's Codex and then traded it back to the Empire for that? Jalen goes through all this effort to wipe out his brother's reputation, role, and then life, but gets snuffed out immediately after like the assistant manager beta he is. What danger was Jalen to the universe either? Why does any of this matter? Who freaking cares? There are so many uninteresting, flimsy setups that lead to uninteresting, flimsy payoffs in this game, and they built a 50+ hour experience around them. Maybe this had a stronger, firmer story at some point, but here we are. Holy shit. On the bright side, everyone got together with the rebels to blow up one of the Empire's many Star Destroyers. That's cool, I guess. It might have been more fun if I hadn't just been killed by ND5 and a bunch of one-shotting Imperial snipers over and over again leading up to it. I can't emphasize enough how much I just wanted the game to be finished by then. I suppose this ending is supposed to show how selfless Kay is, or maybe how selfless she becomes, just like Han Solo did over the course of A New Hope. But the thing is, Kay never comes across as someone with a redemption arc. Yeah, she wants some cash, she wants a score, but not for the sake of the cash or the score itself. She wants to find some stability in her life doing the one thing she's been training to do, and has proven elusive. The game cuts to black on Kay and that ancient bucket of bolts she rescued after turning down nearly every opportunity she spent the entire game working for. Kay and ND5 are gonna go out there somewhere so that she can do what? Hunt for the treasure chest she missed in the caverns of Tashara? Maybe the incoming DLC will answer that, but for now I'm just kind of shocked about it all and how empty the scenario is. A mid-credits addendum helps her clear up things with her mom as she projects far more knowledge and confidence in just a minute of screen time than anything she expresses in all the game you just played through. Buy the season pass, everyone. Before we round this up, can we talk about credits? Not just these credits, but the credits for AAA games altogether, because they've gotten absolutely insane with how indulgent they've become. In my Max Payne review, I showed off how the series went from a 3.5-minute credit roll under Remedy for their first 2 games in the series, but for Rockstar's third game, the credits ran for nearly half an hour. Their credits are presented in a single file line because there's no scarcity of space here. Movies need to get people out of theater seats for the next showing, and printed liner notes for albums still have to fit in their respective CD cases or vinyl sleeves. Games exist in a digital infinity where we bend around their whims, not the other way around. Outlaws credits list off so many people who worked on the game from Ubisoft's constellation of worldwide studios. But as it gets into Walt Disney and its Lucasfilm arm, it looks like they're just listing everyone who works for the company, even if they've never actually touched this game. Then they just start listing people from Ubisoft Studios again. But it appears that these guys are the ones who didn't actually work on the game, they just work for these studios. They've got financial planning analysts and campus managers in here. I wouldn't be surprised if this was nearly every employee at Ubisoft as a company, just because they have their names already and they can easily put them in a list with their titles. Some headers look like they're just listing everyone who works at some middleware they licensed. Here's Intel with several dozen names attached with no titles at all. The Ubisoft news team is listed here too. You may think this is such a weird take because no one watches the credits to games. Not out of disrespect, but a lack of interest because fuck artists and whatever. That's true, but for those who are actually watching the credits, looking for their name, looking for the respect due to them for their role in this production, why would you be interested in waiting to find your name in this hour-long bloated parade when many of the people in here probably didn't work on the game directly at all? Like, do albums need to list every single Sony and Philips employee who helped bring the compact disc format to life on top of the production staff in the studio? Do all movies need to list the Lumiere brothers and other primordial contributors to the format? As YouTube user Cullen Delmore 2614 said when replying to my short about this very topic, I do not need to see every contracted accounting firm's founding partner who's never heard of the project credited at the end of the game. There's a certain nobility in struggling to produce art. People who are not in the trenches or leading throughout that struggle do not need to be in the credits. Amen, buddy. I had a lot of fun with Star Wars Outlaws, and it's incredible how much love has been invested into it to make it feel like a genuine extension of a legendary science fiction property. Despite the frustration of losing so much progress infiltrating places, I loved infiltrating places. I loved how well the game lets you hop on and off worlds. I like Kay Vess and her growth as a character alongside her acquisition of skills in the form of gameplay mechanics. Nyx is adorable, even if they're a mandatory franchise cliche. I loved losing hours to Sabacc, jumping and leaping and prodding alien cliffsides, shooting up Imperial stormtroopers, and exploring inspired old-school settings. It's so refreshing. I want to emphasize this. I really like Star Wars Outlaws. The big problem with this game then is something that I've talked about repeatedly in this review. This is a game that is truly better than the sum of its parts. In breaking down Outlaws' little moments out individually, they're all somewhat interesting, but they're all missing their full potential. Each piece feels sanded down too far, missing capability and expansion. Outlaws works because by the time you realize that any individual element is oversimplified or underwhelming, it's shoving something else in your face to distract you. Element after element, feature after feature. You've heard me go, what if it just did this other simple thing as well? This is a game where anytime I stepped into a turbo lift, I kept looking for a switch but never found one. Because they're all automatic. That's the kind of game Star Wars Outlaws is. As an idealist and armchair game designer, I usually have a long list of major suggestions by the time I finish a game. But with Star Wars Outlaws, I don't really have one. I never thought that the game would be better if it let you own a manor on each planet or had more interesting space gameplay. Outlaws does not beg for a TIE Fighter-ish space campaign. I didn't feel like the dark flashlight sections needed more horror overtones. Could the platforming use a little more variety? Yeah, maybe. Sure. This is a game molded for purpose, like fast fashion. Once I was done with it, it felt pretty disposable. There's a hollowness here, an inescapable feeling that the game is missing something critical that never materializes, even after completing the game's lackluster and somewhat nonsensical story. After the credits rolled, playing it any further seemed pointless. I kept thinking, was that it? It didn't feel like I'd accomplished much of anything. It makes sense then that the sheer quantity of content in here is overwhelming and to an extent unnecessary. Superficial, like gift wrapped after you've shredded the present. Yeah, I get that practically every open world has that post-credits return period where you can finish up what you were working on before you engage the point of no return final story quest. But everything I did on the way to the heist in this game felt meaningful, and everything afterward didn't. I put in another dozen hours beyond that and still didn't feel like I was accomplishing much more than adding time to the clock. The ride was over. I felt a little dizzy from the curves, and now it was time to step off. Everything in this game is in service of that ride. Everything here seems baked with a hyper-specific purpose and nothing else. This is an experience calibrated so thoroughly and completely, the result of so many generations of iteration, that changing any one thing would break 3 other things. It feels like adding any more mechanics would turn this game into something else entirely. I have no doubt that if I popped in Far Cry 6 or the latest Assassin's Creed and played those to completion, I'd find parallels in the formula, just altered and redressed as Star Wars stuff. It's this well-baked Ubisoft formula that makes this game work at a fundamental level, but it also makes it feel like a device trapped by the creator's lack of mechanical ambition. Each individual component in Outlaws becomes obsolete because it's no longer collaborating to serve an end goal. Upgrading my abilities to pick up more grenades or healing vials didn't have a point anymore. Neither did filling out my wardrobe. Boosting or not boosting my reputation with the syndicates didn't have a point because it never really did. Combing the terrain of these planets and seeking out treasure is the most fun I had in the game, but clearing maps of treasure caches didn't contribute to much of anything, and beyond some reasons to check out your ship's mailbox for costume components and trinkets, they never really did either. Then again, neither did acquiring money. At all. Ever. If riding my speeder bike across the bucolic plains of Tushara is fun, but there's no longer a destination, what good is it? If blasting people is fun, but I've exhausted my reasons to visit an outpost to blast its patrollers to bits, what good is it? Starfield is raised for being such a boring space game with a crappy story that doesn't have the gravitas of Morrowind, the best Elder Scrolls game, but Starfield has some legs because it's built on complex simulations. It leaves space for weirdness and experimentation. There, you can build new ships and improve old ones. You can't do that here. There, 1,000 worlds await to be explored, even if they're barren and anonymous. Not here. There, the random encounters are strange and different because they emerge from simulations. They don't exist here. But Star Wars Outlaws is also a product, a twin-pillar tribute to some sturdy existing intellectual properties. One pillar is a loving tribute to the art, atmosphere, lore, and experience that is Star Wars, which you care for or you don't. The other pillar is recognizing that this is a Ubisoft open world game that has been polished and streamlined to a sheen, which you care for or you don't. Your mileage is gonna vary. This specific combination of a firmly established game formula and a firmly established media property gates its appeal. You already know if this is going to be for you from a mile away. And because this game is a product, there's a thorough and complete feeling that this is a game that wasn't necessarily designed by committee, but definitely approved by it, and multiple ones, at Developer Massive, Publisher Ubisoft, Rights Holder Lucasfilm, and Corporate Overlord Disney. Outlaws usually feels too easy, too approachable. When it becomes difficult, it does so arbitrarily, in a huge attempt to not overstay its welcome with meaningless grinding busywork that'll drag your playtime to a completely unnecessary 100 hours like other recent Ubisoft games. Outlaws pens you in a bit, perhaps a bit too much. Even though I am most of a decade divorced from playing and completing a Star Wars game or a Ubisoft game, it's clear how much this team had to lean on familiar experiences, how many templates they had to lean on to not be too experimental and strange to gamers. It also had to ship earlier than expected, so there are bugs and performance issues that are well and publicly documented. Then I wondered why the professional Metacritic response has been so middling for this game, considerably lower than my gut feelings, and my hypothesis is what I pitched at the beginning of the video. Fatigue. The people who are reviewing this game professionally, and not the users who are review bombing it for stupid culture wars bullshit, are probably the people who are having to review each new Ubisoft game as it releases and watch every new weekly Star Wars thing for content purposes. They have these behemoths' formulas and tropes ingrained in their bones by now. Disney-era Star Wars has become so voluminous that it dismissed one of the biggest appeals of the franchise when I was growing up, the rarity I talked about earlier. For my entire childhood, there were 3 movies, some Golden Age LucasArts games, and then a sea of largely ignorable crap. The far less than white-hot anticipation and reaction to this game makes sense. There's too much Star Wars now. There's just too much to keep track of. On the other hand, Ubisoft has been milking their open world game in various stripes for well over a decade. I have the fortunate position of not needing to play every new Assassin's Creed and Far Cry that comes out, or every episode of Star Wars as it releases. I think Andor is the best thing that's happened to Star Wars maybe ever, but I've spared myself most of everything else. Outlaws has a roadmap, and these are early days. There are plenty of patches and story expansions to come, but honestly, I'm not entirely sure what they'll add or change that'll vastly change my opinion about it when the issues I have with it are so fundamental to the experience. Those who are holding out on the game, waiting for it to get better or something, there's nothing that 6 or 9 months of additional content and fixes is going to do to this game to change your mind. They can fix the unforgiving checkpointing and add more story, but if you want to know if this game is, or ever will be for you, you can play it today and know for certain. Outlaws is not high art. This is not changing the industry or setting trends. It's a cinder block of a game based on rigidly accepted formulas that's designed to improve a couple of P&L sheets. But it's fun. It's so fun. It's comfort food, the gourmet burger and fries when you're starving after a long day. I came in for that, and I left with that, even if the fries were a little salty and the milkshake took forever to arrive. Well, we made it to the end. This is the 25th Nth review, on or about the 10th anniversary of this channel. So if you haven't already watched the 10th anniversary reflection retrospective thingy that I did for the channel, check it out because it's a lot of insight and it's very personal to me. And it can give you some insight. And here's the Curbs, who did not do his Patreon message for the day or for the video because people like to skip that or something. Go check out patreon.com/the Nth review. That'd be dope. As he rams his head into here. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank my producers, James Wyatt, John M., Christina Adams, Lee Kenyon, Mitchell, Rain101, Romega, Steve Brunwasser, and Yahoo Silverman, and my executive producer, Chandler Maillard. Thank you guys so much for supporting the channel financially, with your heart, with your mind, just sharing stuff, liking things. If you haven't hit the like button, hit the like button. Subscribing, it's been a hell of a 10 years, and it's just been fun to go through this game too. So we'll see how everything goes. All right. I think that's all I got. Go watch, if you haven't, go watch hang on, get the videos over here. The 10th anniversary thing, and also go watch the newest Nth review, number 24 on the Red Faction series. That needs a little love. That was a fun project. Go check that out too. Even though apparently my sensitivity was too high in the first game and I look like a fool shooting stuff. C'est la vie. All right, just watch that with that in mind. But Red Faction 10th anniversary. Let's get the hell out of here. All right, bye.